A long-haired guy was sitting on a chair and carving a car figurine out of wood. It was a man named Albert. He used to live on Earth, but was reborn in the body of a beggar. He was in his house. He had to go through 100 years of training, but now he had only been training for 4 years. The hero entered a room with a large model of the city. He wanted to return to his previous life. Albert looked at the wooden skyscrapers and missed home. The hero walked out of his hut. He was in the territory of the Heavenly Throne sect. The guy pushed off the ground and soared into the air like a bird. Suddenly, a man called out to him. It was Chris. He was also trained in various techniques, but he stood out especially for his physical strength. When Albert landed next to him, the boy began to beg him to teach him the technique of flying. The hero advised Chris to stop training his attack technique and switch to flying. The guy was a little offended by this joke, because 100 strength was his calling card. The main character explained that 3 months ago, several wild animals escaped from their cages. These creatures seriously mauled Chris. He was bleeding. His clothes were torn. The wild wolves opened their fanged jaws to tear him to pieces. Suddenly, the animals were pierced by sharp stakes that appeared out of nowhere. Albert saved the boy and asked how he was feeling. Chris begged the hero for a long time to teach him such a cool move. After some time, the guy heard that one of the mentors would give a lecture on attacking techniques. Albert believed that defensive techniques were most important because to survive was to win. Chris went to a lecture, and the protagonist studied the board with new techniques. Among the tablets, there was one special one. It was the ability to use medicinal plants in alchemy. Albert came to a nice girl who was accepting people who wanted to take courses. She stated that there were only 3 free spots left, and that the course would cost 50 spiritual stones. The hero was a little shocked because for a whole year of work he received only 100. The girl assured that it was possible to learn this technique only with the help of a teacher. After some thought, Albert agreed and gave 50 stones. When the hero turned away, the girl recognized him as a fool because he tried to learn alchemy with almost no money. In the evening, Albert strolled through the local market and hoped that his investment would bring benefits. Suddenly, a man called out to him. It was Uncle Brad. The man began to scold the hero for not paying the bride ransom, and Albert felt ashamed. In the past, Brad's daughter Lily and the hero agreed to get married when the guy collected money for the ransom. It was just a joke. The protagonist said goodbye to his father-in-law and headed home, asking him not to tell his daughter about their meeting. Brad said with a smile that Lily already knew. Suddenly, a girl attacked Albert. She was serious. Lily clung to the hero so tightly that he asked her to loosen her grip. The hero told the girl that their engagement was just a bad joke. The father was angry. Lily was obsessive, and according to local tradition, Albert was obliged to marry her. The girl took the hero's gift out of her pocket. The guy tried his best to convince Lily that everything that was happening was just a simple misunderstanding. A tear ran down the hero's cheek. He was in a hopeless situation. After some time, having miraculously gotten rid of the crazy bride, Albert headed home and noticed something strange. Chris waved at him from the ground, holding a cute little sheep in his hand. Albert was worried that the guy would be caught by the local police, but he reassured him by saying that he had bought a sheep, so there was no reason to worry. Chris went to the hero's house to cook the animal. The guy was amazed by the technology that hid the hut under the dome. Chris assured that with his abilities, Albert could become a rather important person in the sect. The hero shut the guy up and asked him to never talk about it again. After a short verbal altercation, the protagonist asked his friend to bring him a sheep. A few minutes later, a delicious meal prepared using a secret technique was lying on the table. To complement this sumptuous dinner, Chris took a bottle of wine out of his bag. Albert immediately noticed the catch, because the guy would never have spent so much money on such an ordinary day. Chris reported that a high-ranking mentor had noticed him, so he would soon leave and would not see the hero for a long time. The guy burst into tears and thanked Albert for saving him. Now they might never see each other again because Chris would be sent on dangerous missions. After some time, the guys ate the sheep and Chris thanked the hero for the excellent food. As the boy was about to leave the gate, Albert threw him a scroll. Chris thanked the protagonist again and hurried off to his business. Albert didn't have many friends in this world, so he was very worried about the guy. The next morning, the hero was lying on a deck chair, planning to grow rice, sell it, and learn alchemy and forging. In this universe, there were kingdoms in which celestial beings lived. To earn such a title, one must devote more than 1,000 years to spiritual training. But Albert couldn't do them now, because if he died before a certain date, he would not be reborn. The hero created several birds in his palm and launched them into the air. Having flown far enough, they exploded spectacularly. The main character was in despair because he could not show his abilities to anyone, because there would be a person who would decide to kill him out of envy. Suddenly, Albert realized that he could teach new techniques to other people. In addition, Future students will be obliged to protect their teacher. Suddenly, the security system reported that someone was trying to scan the location of the hero's house. The guy decided not to pay attention to such a trifle, but rather to focus on new techniques. He came up with a spell that would allow him to take the soul of a beast and place it in a new body when needed. To test his idea, Albert grabbed a sparrow flying past. The hero, with the help of complex technology, was able to turn the bird into porcelain. But unfortunately, the sparrow did not fly, but fell right on Albert's head. The frustrated hero admitted that he needed to train even more. At this time, Chris was in the forest and laughing. It turned out that he easily killed a wildcat thanks to the technique that the main character taught him. In the morning, a man came to Chris. He hoped that the guy would not be attacked by a dangerous animal. When he saw the dead cat, the man dropped the fox carcass from his hands and was very surprised. The fighter couldn't even imagine that such a talented guy would join them. There were a total of 4 ranks of fighters in this world, starting from D and ending with A. Level A masters received the best of everything, and they were trained to become future elites. Chris, suspecting that his comrade was shocked by his capabilities, put on an innocent face. The man encouraged the boy by saying that he would need to kill a few more beasts to earn an A rank. By evening, Chris managed to get to Albert's house and told him what had happened. The guy suggested that the hero also join the combat squad. His skills would be very useful there. Albert did not like to kill and was afraid of dying himself. Besides, warriors occupied a lower position than alchemists. Chris tried to convince the hero that, in his opinion, the ability to instill terror in enemies is every man's dream. The guy assured that the main character's abilities could even elevate him to the status of a celestial being. Plus, Chris will be able to travel there with him. Albert asked why the boy wanted to get into the kingdom of heaven so much. The hero tried to convince his friend that that world was too cruel and terrible. The protagonist cut a piece of meat in half with a spell and shared it with Chris. Greedily eating the treat, the boy offered Albert to take him on as an apprentice. The hero couldn't believe his ears. He imagined Chris as a future A-rank fighter. The young man said that one of his ancient ancestors was a wise warrior. After his death, the family fell into decline, but he left a list in which almost all of his knowledge was recorded. From them, Chris read about the fierce fighters of other sects. The Heavenly Arrow sect is considered the strongest in the world. People who studied old and created new techniques were called spellcasters. Chris begged Albert to make him such a master of spells. The hero said that the boy was already 18, so it was too late for him to become a student. Using an unusual technique, the main character erased a small fragment of his friend's memory. Chris didn't remember anything. Albert reminded that he wanted to become an A-rank warrior and asked to teach him a couple of techniques. The guy made a cute face like he was a kitten and thanked his friend for his help. The next day, the hero wrote down everything he learned from Chris. He was filled with knowledge of this world. Albert wondered if he could reach the central continent. The main character threw these bad thoughts aside and decided to take a day off. After a while, the guy got bored and dreamed of a computer with internet access. The prospect of a century of training did not appeal to him. Suddenly, a huge flying ship appeared right above the hero's house. The ship was guarded on all sides by specially trained fighters on Firebirds. Albert decided that it was an expedition that went in search of valuable resources. The hero was distracted by a knock at the gate. Chris was standing on the threshold. The guy didn't look well. He injured his leg while doing the task, so he took the day off. Albert scolded Chris for not using his flying technique to defend himself. The hero called his friend a lousy fighter who doesn't think ahead. In fact, Chris came to Albert to get advice on killing the mighty beast. The hero did not agree. The guy reproached him for hiding the true power of his abilities from everyone. After some thought, the magician decided to train Chris in exchange for information about flying ships. Albert moved through the air and transported himself and his comrade into a certain space. It was a training illusion. Chris was supposed to have a trial fight. The magician created a stone-praying mantis, and the fighter had only 15 minutes to deal with it. The insect attacked Chris so suddenly that he barely dodged it. The guy fired several fire spears at his enemy. The mantis easily dodged the projectiles, and the fighter was perplexed. Albert admitted that Chris moved quite quickly but released his pikes too slowly. The guy was angry because he couldn't deal with such a simple enemy. Suddenly, the mantis dealt him a powerful blow and Chris flew back. The fight ended, and the guy was very upset by the defeat. Albert advised him to watch the enemy's behavior and predict his movements. The hero put 2 fingers to the guy's forehead. He suggested that he use a technique that would restrict the enemy's movements. The magician suggested that Chris have another training session in the future to work on his shortcomings. Albert sat down on a chair in a businesslike manner and asked his friend to tell him everything about flying ships. The guy said that 500 years ago, the Supreme Mentor collected everything that the sect's servants had and went to the central continent to build a ship. Because the inhabitants had nothing left, they suffered from hunger and went mad at the sight of the spiritual stones. After some time, the Mentor returned on a brand new ship and the life of the sect began to improve. On the ship, the ruler planned to collect resources in the Great Sea, which was considered endless. The ship had the ability to fly to protect itself from deep-sea monsters. There were also rumors that it was possible to go beyond the celestial boundary with it. Chris pointed to the blue sky. Albert thought the guy meant space, but unfortunately, only the most developed sects could leave the kingdom. The hero asked if it was possible to get on board the ship and inspect it. Chris explained that spell researchers and A-rank warriors were allowed in there. Masters of alchemy and forging, and of course the captain of the ship itself, could also get on board the ship. Albert's dreams of getting there were dashed because, at best, he would have to train for hundreds of years and try not to die. Chris offered him to join the combat squad together to make it easier, but the hero refused. The magician explained that he would now be busy selling rice to pay for the forging and alchemy courses. The next morning, Albert arrived at the alchemy training halls. He thought to himself about how to quickly return to his world to his beloved parents. The protagonist approached the man standing at the gate and introduced himself as a new student. The man explained that the boy would have to pay 500 spiritual stones for 2 years of training. Albert was very reluctant to part with his money. Behind the gate, the hero saw a very tall tower. He was impressed. The guy accompanying the magician wondered why such poor people were getting involved in alchemy. The man hypocritically wished Albert success in his studies and said goodbye. The hero entered the classroom and saw a bunch of students. Suddenly, he smelled a pleasant, sweet scent of perfume. This scent came from the beautiful girl standing in the center of the office. Albert, struck by her beauty, introduced himself and asked who she was. The girl called herself Claire. She was the mentor's daughter and could conduct the lesson in his absence. The hero answered her uncertainly, and she thought that he was unwell. Albert lied when he said he was worried about falling behind the other students. The girl calmed the hero down and suggested that they work individually. The lesson began and Claire asked the main character to listen to her very carefully. Albert noted that events were developing too quickly. It seemed he had fallen in love. The guy began to imagine how he would have to be alone with her in the evening. These thoughts made the hero very excited and his nose started bleeding. At this time, Claire announced that today they would be studying plant processing techniques. Albert was incredibly happy. He would finally be able to become a master of alchemy. After a month, he was able to begin real training of his skills. Now he was learning the technique of non-contact use of fire. The hero was surprised because he thought he had mastered her with ease. Suddenly, the pot exploded and left a trail of soot on Albert's face. The novice alchemist was very scared. These cauldrons were very expensive. To his regret, he discovered a rather large crack on it. It was believed that to create his first pill, a student had to spend 20 cauldrons, and to become a mentor, more than 1,000. Albert confidently decided to continue trying. The rules did not apply to him. A short time later, 2 more explosions thundered, and the hero's clothes were badly damaged. The student looked into the cauldron and burst into tears of joy. He had succeeded. The hero understood how to do it and decided that now he would be able to recoup the cost of the boiler and make a little profit. The next day, he went to the alchemy training hall again. Mentor Thomas, who was also Claire's father, asked if any of the students had been able to complete his task of creating a pill. The students' faces twisted and sweat ran down them. But only Albert remained calm. The budding alchemists admitted that they had blown up more than 1 cauldron. Suddenly, the mentor stared very intently at the protagonist. Thomas created a noise barrier and asked his daughter to be more careful with it. The teacher explained that he saw serious potential in him. Later, the hero returned to training. He tried to do everything without mistakes in order to save up for a new boiler. Suddenly, he heard a noise in the lighthouse. Apparently, he had a neighbor. He approached the building and Lily jumped on him. The girl decided to visit her husband and reported that she had reached a new level of her abilities. Lily pushed off the ground and began to float in the air. The girl boasted that one mentor wanted to take her as a student. Albert praised Lily. She also reminded him of the ransom that the hero must bring to his father. The magician offered to cook dinner for Lily. The girl thanked her husband for the delicious food, and the hero reminded her that their wedding was just a joke. The guy considered himself an unsuitable candidate for the role of her husband. At these words, Lily flooded the entire table with her tears. 3 hours later, the girl was still crying, and Albert tried to calm her down. He eventually agreed to pay ransom for her. Lily immediately calmed down and began to eat rice. Albert was furious that he was simply being used. The hero resigned himself to this wedding and kindly stroked the bride's head. After a while, the main character was devouring a delicious pancake. The girl really wanted to try it. Suddenly, a beautiful woman with a blue bird appeared in the sky. At the sight of her, Albert's mouth began to water, like a dog at the sight of a piece of meat. The hero hoped that the system took pity on him and gave him a beauty for all his suffering. The girl stated that she had come here for a man from the Heavenly Throne sect. Albert decided that they were talking about him and was already preparing to go with the stranger. Suddenly, the woman lifted Lily into the air and offered to become her mentor. A projection of a man appeared in the air, and he asked not to take the girl with them because they needed another person. The girl insisted on her own, declaring that their destinies were connected. Lily asked the hero what she should do. Many predatory eyes were looking at Albert, and he felt uneasy. The guy replied that Lily should not miss such an opportunity. The bride wanted to visit her lover. The woman allowed her to do so. Lily was the bearer of the heavenly spirit. The guy she chose was the chosen one of heaven. The girl agreed, and the teacher seated her on her blue bird. They flew away. Albert was glad. He finally got rid of his annoying little wife. The hero became motivated to become stronger and decided to study the recently purchased book of techniques. Suddenly, a very strong and courageous guy appeared on the threshold of his house. It was Chris. He was killing animals in the forest. Stronger than him, the guy came back to rest. The guy asked how to deal with the two remaining enemies. They were too strong. One of them was a ground eater, a monster that would bury itself in the ground when it saw danger. The second was a very fast cat that could inflict fatal wounds. Chris asked his friend to teach him a technique to defeat them. Albert agreed, but this training would be more difficult than the previous one. Now he has created two praying mantises that have the abilities of an earth eater and a cat. While the hero was explaining to Chris how to deal with them, one of the insects attacked him. The magician pierced the enemy with one gesture without even flinching. The guy was shocked by his friend's abilities. Suddenly, Chris was attacked by another praying mantis. Albert finished off the nasty insect again with just one blow. The boy begged the magician to teach him such a powerful technique. The main character made fun of his friend and said that he needed to shave his head to learn this ability. In the end, the guy, through tears, agreed. Albert looked at his comrade and laughed very loudly. Chris shaved anyway, and the hero praised him for his courage, barely holding back his laughter. The upset guy asked why the main character was so strong but not shaved. The Joker said that he was not trying to become stronger, so there was no need for a haircut. Albert pushed his friend to the gate and ordered him to practice this technique at home. Now that he had dealt with the annoying comrade, it was time to get down to important matters. 3 months later, Lily was already flying on a bluebird in an unknown kingdom. The mentor reproached the girl that her skills were worthless and that it was too early for her to think about returning home. The woman remembered a recent nightmare. Monsters circled around her, and she herself was chained and pierced with a spear. It was a sign of disaster, and she believed that only Lily could prevent it. The young girl asked permission to go for a walk and meet her husband. The mentor allowed her to walk around a bit, but forbade her from seeing her lover. Meanwhile, Albert decided to visit the forging training hall. He was dazzled by the sight of a pile of shining heads of students. One of the students told a friend that his friend from the combat unit shaved and became very strong. The main character regretted his actions. His joke turned out to be rather unsuccessful. After a while, most of the sect's disciples shaved their heads, which was a real sensation. Meanwhile, the hero complained that learning to forge was too hard. He had already spent 10,000 stones. Suddenly, the guy saw his old friend and called out to him. It was his friend named Dylan. He was quite plump and came from a rich family. The fat man heard about Albert's success in alchemy and decided to reward him with a spiritual stone, but the boy refused. The hero suspected that Dylan had business with him. The magician invited the guy to visit and treated him to a cup of tea. The fat man explained that he had come up with an idea to unite students studying outside the sect. Albert was surprised by this. He thought that he did not care about ordinary people because he was the descendant of a rich family. Dylan planned to create a kind of alliance of people willing to help each other. For help in this matter, the hero will be able to receive news from the sect among the first. He will also be able to make useful connections by teaching inexperienced newcomers. Dylan was confident that the alliance would flourish if Albert joined them. As a parting gift, the fat man gave the magician a magic ball to maintain communication. Albert said goodbye to his old friend. Suddenly, a very familiar voice began to whisper in his ear. The hero turned around and saw Claire. He explained that he was just seeing a friend. The beauty suggested going to Albert's house. He had never seen such beautiful girls in real life. The guy kindly treated her to some delicious tea. Claire was very nervous. The girl felt uneasy and began to notice something strange about herself. In her thoughts, she admitted that the more she looked at the hero, the more she realized that she had fallen in love. Claire reproached herself. She must not forget the true purpose of her visit. She placed her hands on the table imperiously and asked why Albert did not want to become part of the alchemy department. Claire moved even closer. She was worried because the hero did not want to become her father's student. The main character confessed everything. Alchemy was just a way to make money by selling pills. The girl begged him not to kill his talent and to find a mentor. Albert decided to reveal his plan. He asked Claire if she was on board the flying ship. The girl answered positively, and the hero told her about his dream of building the same one for himself. The magician didn't want Claire's father to waste his time and energy teaching him. The beauty seemed to be furious at what she heard. She remembered how her brother left the family to become the best blacksmith master. The girl's gaze became sad and she asked Albert not to give up. Claire left. The main character looked after her for a long time. The guy enjoyed the freedom and the fact that he had no obligations to anyone. Suddenly, Dylan's magic ball began to vibrate in his pocket. It contained all the news of the sect. Among them was the news about Chris. It turned out that the guy started dating the most beautiful student of the sect named Eva. The future warrior talked a lot about Albert, and they decided to visit him. The main character congratulated his friend on the fact that he was able to win the heart of such a good girl. The magician suggested talking inside the hut. Chris said that Eva was infected by a monster while they were on a mission, and now the girl couldn't sleep normally. Albert used the aura cleansing technique to help her. A soul eater flew out of the girl's body. The main character killed the spirit and asked his friend to be careful. Eva admired the magician's skill and suggested that they go with him to open the secret portal. The hero considered this venture too risky, so he refused. Chris mentioned that you can stumble upon something valuable in the portal, even on the records of the forging masters. Albert pricked up his ears, his eyes lighting up with excitement. The hero agreed. Now he needed 1,000 spiritual stones to enter. In the evening, he began to study the basics of forging in order to be as prepared as possible. This activity required a lot of things: raw materials, runes, spiritual fire. The most important thing is to insert the rune into an object that has not yet cooled down. Albert found forging more interesting than alchemy lessons. On the ball, Dylan praised the protagonist for learning 2 crafts at once. The fat man decided to share with him the secret of combining these activities. Later, the magician went to the forge halls. He gave the duty officer a spiritual stone and asked him to give him a room. Everything necessary to start training was here. The room was very hot, so Albert used the ice armor technique. To begin with, he decided to cross scarlet steel and iron ore. Dylan said that a person studying forging and alchemy should not count on help from heaven. The hero began to forge metals. First, he processed the ore with hammers. Now the blacksmith added molten steel and formed the sword. It was time to insert the runes. The hero decided to make it hard as a rock and light as a feather. Unfortunately, the weapon exploded at the final stage. Albert was depressed. He wasted 400 spiritual stones. A man entered the room and asked what happened. It was the manager. Blacksmith's halls, the hero was ashamed of his ineptitude. The magician came up with a plan. The man is obliged to teach him, otherwise he will not go anywhere. 3 days later, Chris and Eva were flying to the entrance of the secret portal. Suddenly, something flew past them. It was Albert. He felt sorry for the poor crane on which the couple was flying. Chris was amazed that his friend was riding on a forged sword. The immodest protagonist asked to be called a forging master from now on. The long-bearded man announced the rules for being on the other side of the portal. Chris hoped that the hero would go with them, but he destroyed his hopes. Instead, he gave him a special crystal. The guy could send a signal, and Albert would come to the rescue. The fighter thanked his friend. The main character flew into the opened portal with lightning speed. The hero, left alone, looked at the beautiful landscape of the green forest. He had to spend a whole month here, so the magician decided to build a small base here. Suddenly, wild animals jumped on him out of nowhere. Albert turned around and looked at them with a terrible look. He used a special technique against them and ordered them to bring useful things. The hero went in search of the runes left here by the forging masters. On the way, the magician came across a small lake and decided to examine it. Suddenly, a column of water shot out of it, as if a volcano had erupted. There was an unknown guy standing on the water's surface, apparently also from the Heavenly Throne sect. The young man introduced himself as Nicholas. His face was beautiful. Albert was in a state of shock. The stranger was holding a magic sword in his hand. The protagonist greeted him and said that he was an outer disciple of the sect. Nicholas was glad to meet him. He looked like the main character. The young blacksmith did not understand what he wanted. The guy extended his hand to Albert. In his palm lay a beautiful pearl. It seems he wanted the magician not to tell anyone about the things he found. The hero thought that Nicholas was also a real person who had ended up in this world. The magician began to ask him questions related to the culture of the earth. The young man insisted that he did not understand what was being discussed. The protagonist accepted the pearls and promised to keep his mouth shut. Nicholas said goodbye to the stranger kindly. Albert decided to keep his distance from him. The young man jumped on his sword. He believed that their paths might still cross. The hero would not want to be nearby if something bad happened to him. Nicholas left behind only eyeless turtles in the lake. By evening, Albert had collected a large number of different resources and was resting in the hut. Suddenly, there was a knock on the front door. The hero became wary. Opening the door, he saw a bunch of green eyes in front of him, looking at him angrily. The guy decided that there was a whole crowd of ghosts standing in front of him. He was scared to death. It turned out that these were wolves he had tamed, and Albert calmed down. They brought with them some flowers, a piece of red copper, tree fruits, and spiritual stones. The tired animals immediately went to bed, and the hero realized that they had collected all this from the corpses. The magician hid the hut from prying eyes with the help of technology and went to bed. To his surprise, the hero woke up early and decided to have breakfast. From behind him, he heard the sound of a man flying on a sword. It was Nicholas. He sheathed his weapon and greeted the protagonist in a friendly manner. Albert invited the wanderer to eat with him. The young man was simply delighted with the taste of the freshly cooked soup. The hero asked what the guy was doing, and he explained that he was a candidate for apprentice to the master swordsman Harry. The aspiring blacksmith predicted a great future for him with such a mentor. Nicholas told his story. He used to be a bright student, but his abilities began to fade. Now he is forced to accumulate wealth in every possible way so that if he becomes a simple citizen, he can live a normal life. Albert encouraged the boy and advised him not to give up, in case his strength returned. Nicholas approached the hero and sincerely thanked him for his words of support. The young man expressed a desire to become friends with the main character. The magician was silent, but in his head he did not want to start such a friendship. An hour later, Albert came across a huge spiritual tree from which he could build a flying ship. He took out his magic sword and prepared to cut it. Suddenly, a giant wild bear ran towards him from the thicket. Confident in his powers, the hero ordered the sword to attack the monster. To his surprise, right at the moment of impact, the animal's fur turned to stone. A moment later, the bear rushed to attack again, but immediately howled from unbearable pain. It turned out that Albert used the technique of invisible deadly needles, and the lifeless body of the beast fell to the ground. Half a day later, the main character finally finished building his ship. Suddenly, the alarm went off, meaning Chris was in trouble. The hero immediately boarded his ship and went to help his friend. At this time, Chris was saving his beloved Eva from wild bees. The girl was scared to death and hoped that Albert would still make it to their rescue. Suddenly, the bees shot their stingers straight at the couple. They were deadly. The guy held his beloved tightly in his arms. His eyes seemed to be burning. Chris ate the acceleration pill at lightning speed and managed to dodge the projectiles. Meanwhile, the protagonist noticed them with the help of a vision-enhancing technology. Chris and Eva were incredibly happy. They would finally be saved. Unfortunately, the angry bees surrounded the couple, and the situation became almost hopeless. Albert stood on the edge of the ship and prepared for battle. He used the sound wave destruction technique. It was too strong. The souls left the bees. Their lifeless bodies began to fall to the ground like drops of rain. The main character hooked his friends with a special hook and began to lift them onto the ship. After some time, the hero was frying meat over a fire. He was squeezed out like a lemon. Chris woke up and thought he was in hell and started screaming. The guy rushed to hug his beloved. Albert threw him an elixir that would help him cope with the consequences of the sound wave. Chris began to thank his friend. He had saved his life twice already. The hero scolded the guy and demanded 22,000 spiritual stones for saving him and the elixir. Eva woke up and pinched her beloved on the butt, and he jumped in pain. The girl pressed herself against Chris and began to cry with happiness. They were alive. She thanked Albert from the bottom of her heart, and he asked who came up with the idea to go to the bees. Chris scratched the back of his head in shame. He just wanted to try out the escape technique the hero taught him. In addition, insects had honey, which could cure diseases, and the guy planned to cure Eve's mother. In this way, Chris hoped to reduce the ransom amount for the girl. Albert remembered how in his past life, relationships also took a lot of money from him. The couple was only able to get half of what they had planned, which should have been enough. Eva reported that such a jar could cost up to 2,000 spiritual stones. The main character asked them to tell him where he could be found. After a while, the hero was already riding a deer into a bamboo grove, where a lair of wild bees was located. The guy ordered the animal to hide, and he himself headed deeper into the thicket. After 3 days, he finally came across the insects and began to seduce them. The bees mistook him for a beautiful queen. Now they were under the power of the protagonist and bowed before him. The magician finally found mountains of honey that would make him rich. Suddenly, a real queen bee appeared. She did not succumb to the hero's influence. The guy used a consciousness-paralyzing technique against her. The bee was invulnerable because it and the honey were the property of the Heavenly Throne sect, and disciples were allowed to take a maximum of 1,000 liters. The main character was very sad. His great plan to get rich failed. One of the elders was watching the magician and was amazed by the boy's abilities. Albert began to collect honey, but the elder's voice from the sky ordered him to stop. A few minutes later, the hero loaded 500 liters of liquid onto his ship and set off. Right above him, he noticed a trace of a magic sword. Apparently, it was Nicholas again. The young man approached the mountains of honey and began to calculate his future fortune. Suddenly, a pillar of light fell from the sky, and the elder created a dome that forbade anyone from approaching the grove for the next 150 years. During his air journey, the hero came across the estate of an alchemist master. Albert was furious. All this time, he was trying to find the blacksmith master. There was only 1 hour left before the portal closed. The magician had to hurry. In the estate, he found a bunch of scrolls with quite useful spells. The hero remembered that the portal would close very soon. The guy miraculously managed to get out of there, and Chris and Eva were already meeting him at the exit. The guy suggested that Albert go to the tavern and thank him for saving him. The main character agreed. This month was very difficult. After a long time, the magician was already at home and lying on piles of spiritual stones. He managed to sell the honey. He sent a letter to the Alliance base for Dylan. The hero exchanged 300,000 spiritual stones for a bunch of resources for forging. After 3 years of blacksmithing, he still couldn't insert some runes correctly. Albert came up with the idea of using another rune as a mediator. The hero decided to try to use his idea in practice. The fragments came together to form a brand new magic sword. The blacksmith rushed to embrace him as if he were a loved one, and now the weapon was called the Thousander. The main character received news from the sect through a magic ball. A recruitment of blacksmiths for training had opened. Over these long 3 years, Albert has already developed to the 8th level. He had no doubt that he would soon be able to fight on equal terms with a much stronger enemy. Thanks to his beast summoning technique, the hero could call upon an entire dragon for help. Soon the magician finally returned home and sprawled out on the lounger. Chris and Eva appeared on the threshold. They were incredibly happy. The guy shared the good news that they would soon be getting married, and he asked Albert to be sure to come to the celebration. The main character and the lovers had a nice dinner. He thought that there was no time for a relationship in his plans. After the meal, the magician stood up from his chair and asked to follow him. Chris and Eva were perplexed. He led them into a room where weapons and shields he had forged hung on the walls. The hero didn't have a wedding gift, so he offered the couple to choose anything. Eva asked if she could take the Swords of Insight. They were very useful in battle. Chris asked permission to take the 1000th. It could crumble into pieces and take any form. Albert gave them the chosen weapons and saw them off. Deep in his soul, he regretted the time and resources spent on forging them. A month later, the hero went to the capital of the sect. There would soon be a wedding. He was carrying a giant sack on his back, and the journey to the ceremony site was not short. Luckily, the magician had a flying ship, and he called it to lighten his load. Suddenly, the hero heard a familiar sound from behind. It seems it was Nicholas again. The guy was incredibly happy to see his friend after 3 years. The young man immediately noticed the magic ship. Nicholas said that he was going to his friend's wedding. Albert was stunned and asked if his name was Chris. The young man was wildly delighted. He would finally be able to spend time with the hero. Nicholas offered to get there on his personal ship. It was much better than the main character's vessel. When Albert climbed on board, the ship flew at supersonic speed. Carrying Nicholas offered the hero a whole buffet as a sign of friendship. Suddenly, the guy jumped up and asked to wait while he dealt with some insects. He threw 5 balls of different elements at the enemy at once, and the hero envied his skill. Albert saw 5 hostile people opposite the bow of the ship. Nicholas apologized for the inconvenience. He planned to distract the enemies and send the ship with the magician to its destination. The 5 began to quickly approach the heroes. The young man warned that he would deal with any of the enemies. The enemies responded to his words only with mockery. It seems they are confident in their own strength. One of the enemies ordered a guy named Henry to deal with the main character. Nicholas tried to stop Henry to protect Albert. Unfortunately, the gang leader interrupted his actions. He advised the young man to try to protect himself at the moment. A pillar of fire burst out of nowhere into the sky and a major explosion occurred. At this time, Albert promised himself never to go outside the sect again, so as not to get into similar situations. His thoughts were interrupted by Henry, who suddenly ran towards him. The hero decided to use the technique he had been putting off until an emergency. From the small bowl, the soul of a giant dragon burst into the air. The soul climbed inside the wooden copy of the beast. The enemy became even more determined. He was anticipating a wonderful battle. The boy set his pet centipede on Albert, but the dragon killed it with one swipe of its paw. The hero's eyes lit up. He felt superiority over his opponent. The hero ordered the beast to deal with Henry, and it immediately attacked him. The guy was bleeding, but he was not going to give up. He used an unknown technique. The protagonist used all kinds of barriers to protect himself from her. Unfortunately, he didn't succeed. It turned out to be a technique for damaging the psyche. Albert lost consciousness and fell straight overboard the ship. In some mountains there was a hut. The sister asked her brother when they would eat meat. The boy said that first he needed to cure the stranger, who turned out to be the main character. The magician was incredibly grateful to fate for such salvation. It turned out that Albert had been fighting a giant worm in the astral dimension for half a month and had finally won. The main character woke up and sat on the bed. He thanked the children with all his heart for their care. The children bowed down, as they believed, before the celestial being and begged him to take them as disciples. The hero did not see any potential in them and asked why they needed it. The brother and sister loudly declared that they just wanted to eat tasty meat every day. Albert was touched by their sincere honesty. The protagonist used the technique. First, they must pass the test of the spirit. The guy felt sorry for the kids, so even if they failed the test, he would provide them with a comfortable life. Unfortunately, the hero spent a lot of energy fighting the worm. Now he will have to recover for a long time. The magician promised himself not to leave the sect for the next 10 years. Also, you need to stay away from Nicholas to avoid getting into a similar situation. Albert decided to make more fighting dolls upon returning home. Suddenly, a mature man with a cane in his hands entered the hut. The man knelt before the great celestial being. The hero asked him to get up and offered to thank him for saving him. The stranger said that all he wanted was to live to a ripe old age with his beloved wife. The guy gave the man a bottle containing longevity pills. The man asked what was happening with the children. The hero replied that he was checking them before taking them to the sect, where they would be taken care of. The stranger left, and the hero took out the balls with the children's spiritual powers. In the boy's ball, he saw his brother looking after him until old age. The sister wanted to become a great warrior so that everyone would admire her. The hero admitted that after awakening, the children's lives would never be the same. At this time, Chris was sitting at the gate of Albert's hut. He was depressed. The guy blamed himself for what happened to the main character, because it was he who invited him to the wedding. Eva tried to cheer up her beloved and assured him that the magician was now alive and simply healing his wounds. Chris promised himself that he would wait for his friend at the gate until he showed up. The girl sat down next to her lover. They hoped for the best. Meanwhile, Albert arrived at the sect's foreign affairs office and persuaded the leader to make the children his disciples. After that, they rushed away on the ship. The brother asked if it was difficult to become like the hero. The magician said it was easy if they listened to him carefully. The boy had already begun to dream of a daily portion of meat for himself and his sister. The main character just laughed and offered them as much meat as they wanted in the future. Suddenly, Chris sensed a familiar spiritual aura. It was Albert. The guy immediately rushed to hug his friend. Chris looked at his brother and sister who had arrived with the hero. The guy thought they were the main character's children, but Eva immediately admitted that it was just nonsense. The magician hastened to calm his friend's imagination and called them his students. Albert didn't know the children's names, so he asked them to introduce themselves. The boy explained that they don't have them. They are given out for finding special plants named after them. In this situation, the main character came up with names for them. Now the girl was called Kate and her brother Kevin. The children were so grateful that they bowed before their new mentor. To begin with, Albert decided to dress up his students a little. 2 pink flying spheres merged with the children's clothes. Now the brother and sister had very beautiful and comfortable suits. Eva, standing nearby, was surprised by such a useful technique. The hero suggested that the girl try to use the magic ball herself. Eva applied it and ended up with a very revealing outfit. The main character begged her to change clothes, while Chris covered Kevin's eyes with his other hand. The other outfit was no better than the previous one. Now the girl had transformed into a semblance of a cat. Albert asked her to return it all back and try using it at home. After this awkward situation, Chris suggested celebrating the arrival of new students. The magician offered the children to try the meat dish. and they were simply delighted. When the kids walked away, Chris reached into his pocket. A moment later, he handed the hero a red envelope and asked him to accept it. A few days later, the main character went to the forge halls again. He had a bunch of orders. The old man walking behind him reproached the boy for fulfilling commercial orders when every blacksmith was important to the sect. Albert informed him of the situation that had happened on the way to the wedding and promised to help the other blacksmiths soon. The old man asked the boy to show his creation of the day. He unfolded a large box. The stranger lifted the lid and saw a very skillfully forged sword. The old man suggested that the hero leave the orders for now and instead go with him to repair the sect's ship. They jumped into the magic carriage and set off on their journey. Albert kept looking around, admiring the views of previously unknown territories. Suddenly, two scary dragons appeared next to the transport. The old man only laughed at the sight of fear on the hero's face. The animals were guarding the sect. The man also offered to ride them for only 10,000 spiritual stones. The guy politely declined. He had no desire to spend such a large sum on stupid entertainment. After some time, they finally reached the damaged ship. The old man explained the conditions of the work. For every square meter, the hero would receive 1,000 stones, and in addition, as a bonus, he would receive 20 new runes. The man advised him to watch the others work until the master arrived. Albert went to inspect the ship. Later, the master approached him and asked if the guy was ready for work. The hero already understood what was required of him. The master advised him to work at maximum speed. The main character melted metals and fused them into the stern of the ship. The master was delighted with how well and quickly the newcomer worked. After 2 months, the restoration of the ship's hull was finally completed. Albert asked the blacksmith if there was any more work for him, but the man replied that there was not. Thanks to the hero's skill, the work was completed a whole month ahead of schedule. The master predicted a great future for him. The man wanted to help the magician in this difficult task and extended his palm with 5 runes. The main character accepted the gift and promised to make for the master whatever he wanted. After the conversation, the hero decided to explore the place a little. The territory was too big, so the hero would have to come up with a way to get there himself. At this time, Chris and Eva were fighting wild animals far from the sect. The guy offered his wife to exchange the points for this task for an embryonic pill. He planned to send his future child to Albert as an apprentice. Suddenly, another pack of wild animals came towards them. There were 3 very strong enemies among the beasts. Chris and Eva could not retreat. The situation seemed hopeless. The guy would have to use the rescue ball that he acquired from the hero. He swung and threw it upward with all his might. The ball broke into small burning fragments. The animals did not understand what was happening. A moment later, there was a very powerful explosion, and nothing remained of the flock. The couple approached the crater left by the explosion. Chris felt ashamed that he had wasted such a valuable artifact to defeat stupid animals. Eva suggested that her beloved arrange a sparring match with the main character to hone his skills. Suddenly, the husband and wife noticed an unknown green glow at the bottom of the crater. It was a giant piece of iron ore enriched with spiritual energy. Chris once heard that it could be used to make armor that would protect against the strongest opponents. The guy threw Eva a bag of useful pills in battle and ran to mine ore. After some time, the couple came to Albert. As it turned out, he had recently moved. The hero presented his new development to his friends. It was the armor of God, made using enriched iron ore. Chris was amazed by their appearance. The hero suggested that he try them out. The guy didn't even have to do anything. The armor just stuck to him. Chris was able to rise into the air. Eva watched him with admiration. The guy was able to switch the suit to attack mode. He concentrated the energy in his palm and fired it at a nearby stone block. Chris was in awe of the power of this armor. The boy jumped onto the thousand tree and flew through the air like lightning. He congratulated Albert with all his heart for such a cool development. The hero thanked them for the ore they provided. The magician also said that he would soon go on an expedition on a sect ship, so he asked his friends to look after his students. The couple promised to look after them as if they were their own children. The main character prayed to fate that he would never meet Nicholas again. A month later, Albert was already heading to the place where the expedition was being prepared. The hero was delighted by the sight of this majestic ship. The magician, along with other passengers, proceeded on board the ship. To his regret, he heard a familiar voice behind him. It was Nicholas again. The guy hugged his old friend. The hero dreamed of leaving the ship as soon as possible. The young man asked a crew member to put Albert in the cabin next to his. In the evening, all the passengers were having dinner in the dining room. The main character planned to sneak off to the toilet unnoticed. Suddenly, as if out of thin air, Nicholas appeared. He praised the local food. His main goal was to win the hero's respect. Albert asked his friend how he dealt with his problem of losing strength. Nicholas claimed that his affliction simply disappeared as soon as he emerged from that portal 3 years ago. He also told how after this he returned to the girl with whom he had broken off the engagement. He beat up all her brothers, but she dealt with him with just one blow of her hand. The guy promised himself to become stronger in order to regain his lost honor. Drunk Nicholas rushed to hug the main character. He didn't like it very much. In fact, the guy went on an expedition to explore unknown runes that he noticed during repairs. Instead, he has to endure Nicholas's antics. Suddenly, the stranger put his hand on Albert's shoulder. The guy was shocked. Raising his head, he saw a mysterious man in front of him. An unknown person offered the main character to become his student. The man noted his strong spiritual energy. The guy became a little embarrassed. The stranger offered the hero to become part of the forging department. Albert thanked him for the offer, but stated that he was just an amateur and that he liked alchemy better. The man was angry at the lost talent and left. The hero waved after him. The magician did not want to join anyone in order to maintain his independence. Nicholas couldn't understand how his friend could refuse such a tempting offer. Albert was scared to death by his comrade who had sneaked up on him. Nicholas thought that the guy was lying about alchemy. The hero denied his speculations. The main character hid this so as not to attract unnecessary attention. After these words, the magician went for a walk along the deck of the ship. There, he saw a giant water snake jumping out of the ocean. Suddenly, he heard one of the passengers calling the snake the God Eater. The stranger turned out to be Claire. She was accompanied by an unknown guy. The girl introduced Albert to the guy, who turned out to be her older brother Richard. The guy looked as gorgeous as his beautiful sister. Suddenly, the hero grabbed his mouth. He could barely hold back his laughter. He rolled on his bed laughing because his brother's shortened name sounded like an obscene word. Having laughed his fill, the main character wiped away his tears and decided to apologize the next time they met. Albert jumped out of his bunk from the sudden jolt as the ship entered the waters of the endless sea. The guy went up on deck to explore previously unknown territories. He watched the artillery ships accompanying them. The hero dreamed of seeing them in action. Suddenly, Richard appeared. He too was delighted with the power of these weapons. The boy believed that their destinies were connected because they both abandoned alchemy for forging. Richard examined the runes that Albert was working on. The young man realized that the hero was planning to create a device for transmitting information over very long distances. Richard was amazed by his invention. He would never have thought of such a thing himself. Suddenly, a strange signal went off on the ship. A whole squad of people flew out on giant birds. They were called the Golden Patrol. Using hooks, they pulled a whale of enormous size out of the water. Albert watched their well-coordinated work with delight. The carcass of the animal was lifted into the air. Its meat was dangerous to people. The hero came up with the idea of creating his own navy in the future. But it seems his dreams are not destined to come true, because one shot from the cannon costs almost 100,000 spiritual stones. 3 days passed, during which time the magician came to the conclusion that the sect valued blacksmiths the most. The main character was called out by Richard, who told his mentor about his idea. The young man led Albert to the forge hall located on the ship. It was a gigantic room where work was in full swing. The guys walked to the mentor's office. The hero bowed to him. The old man praised the guy and said that this system could be developed and cover the entire continent with communications. The mentor offered the main character to become his student. The magician politely refused, arguing that he wanted to develop both forging and alchemy. After these words, the old man's gaze became truly eerie. A moment later, the teacher just laughed and noted the boy's sincerity. The old man mentioned that his offer still stood, but he would have to give up alchemy. The mentor gave the hero a special pass to access the inner sector. He will wait for him there. Albert sincerely thanked the old man for his understanding and left. After he left, Richard got down on one knee and asked his mentor for forgiveness for his friend's insolent behavior. The old man regretted that he would not be able to participate in the hero's development into a true master. Albert walked along the deck of the ship and thought about the old man's words. Besides, he had a dilemma. He couldn't decide between Claire and Lily. Suddenly, the ship's artillery sounded the alarm. The main ship was immediately covered with a special protective dome. Terrible sea monsters appeared right on the expedition's route. The enemy was fired upon with all available guns. After a while, the clouds dispersed and only the corpses of defeated monsters lay in the sea. The protagonist watched as the members of the Golden Patrol went in search of resources. Nicholas suddenly appeared out of nowhere and explained that such flocks usually guard something valuable. The young man apologized for his behavior. Last time he got drunk and passed out. The guy also said that many great warriors spend their last years at sea before their ascension, so their abodes can be found here. The hero thanked his friend for the useful information. He couldn't wait to loot a couple of them. Suddenly, An entire city appeared before Albert and Nicholas's eyes. The protagonist was surprised. The young man explained that it was just a divine relic found at the site of the victory over the sea creatures. Nicholas grabbed the magician by the hand and carried him straight to the magic city. Just after passing through the gate, the hero came across Claire waving sweetly at him. The girl greeted the hero. She did not expect to see him here. Suddenly, Richard interrupted the conversation and suggested that Albert rent a blacksmith shop for the two of them. Claire suggested practicing alchemy with ingredients raised from the bottom of the sea. The hero replied that he would rather go with the girl. Thomas suddenly appeared and interrupted their sweet conversation. Father ordered Claire to follow him immediately. Albert and the girl waved goodbye to each other. After some time, the hero and Richard were drinking tea and talking in their workshop. Suddenly, a girl appeared on the threshold and asked if they repaired alchemy cauldrons. She was quite attractive, so the protagonist, who knew a little about this craft, approached her. The girl made cute eyes and asked for help. She needed the boiler very soon. The guy examined the device and offered to pay 50 spiritual stones and some ore for its repair. When the girl gave him everything he needed, the hero got to work. He not only fixed the boiler but also strengthened it to give the beauty a small bonus. The magician handed the result of his hard work to the beautiful girl. She grabbed the pot and rushed away, even leaving behind some extra ore. After that, the guy spent a whole month sitting in the forge and fulfilling various orders. The guy told his friend that he had imagined the expedition a little differently. Richard understood his friend, so he suggested that they take a walk around the city. The main character, as if stung, hurried to jump onto the ship and set off to explore the sea. Surprisingly, almost the entire surface of the water was strewn with various monsters. After a long search, Albert found a safe place and decided to dive underwater. To do this, he took a tourist submarine and put an invisibility dome on it. Half an hour later, the hero dived to a depth of about 50,000 meters. His main goal was to try to find the treasure. Looking forward, the main character saw a terrible monster. It was a dolphin. Its eye was shining like a cyborg's. Meanwhile, Nicholas, who miraculously appeared nearby, tried to overcome the giant fish. The boy was talking to his mentor using a special technique. The man was a master in matters of swords. The monster's spine could be used to make an excellent weapon, so the mentor ordered the student to swim to his comrade to help. Nicholas didn't want to endanger Albert's life, so he turned around and took the blow from the fish. The mentor assured him to trust him. The guy had no choice. He headed towards the hero. At this time, the magician was busy collecting useful pearls from the bottom of the sea. He felt uncomfortable, and the main character had a bad feeling. He hurried to swim to the surface as quickly as possible, and a terrible roar sounded behind him. Through the submarine's porthole, Albert saw Nicholas. The boy was bleeding. The hero helped his friend get inside. The wounded Nicholas reported that the monster was almost defeated, but it needed to be finished off. After these words, the exhausted guy lost consciousness. The main character was furious at what he heard. His trip didn't go well at all. The fish rushed towards the boat, and an unknown glow shone above the vessel. It was Albert. He put on special armor so as not to take so many risks. The guy threw the harpoon with all his might into the monster's face. After that, he began to circle around the creature, who did not understand anything. The hero used a powerful technique. Hundreds of sharp spears rushed into the monster's body. Suddenly, the bloodthirsty fish disappeared from sight. The magician felt her behind his back. The monster turned out to be cunning. Albert threw several silver balls towards the creature. These were his fighting dolls, but they turned out to be unsuitable for underwater combat. The hero only planned to distract the monster and accumulate energy to create several clones. Meanwhile, the fish tried to fight off the attacking snakes. The magician finally gathered his strength and prepared for the final attack. The crystal he created shattered into a pile of fragments, and they began to approach the now helpless monster. Everything around was filled with a blue glow, and a strong whirlpool began to form. The sharp ends of the crystals pierced the fish's flesh like swords. Albert chuckled at his once powerful opponent. The current of the whirlpool was so strong that the fish was twisted, and all its bones were broken. The hero took pity on his snakes. The victory cost him 80,000 spiritual stones. The swordmaster who watched the fight recognized the protagonist's talent. The magician returned to the ship and gave Nicholas the medicine. The guy who came to his senses asked for forgiveness for getting his friend into trouble again. Nicholas immediately rushed to the protagonist to make sure he was not seriously injured. Albert handed the young man a small bag containing what was left of the giant fish, and he looked at it thoughtfully. The hero made a cute face, and Nicholas offered him a magic ring that could hold a large amount of water. The guy reluctantly accepted such a valuable gift. He was embarrassed by his friend's excessive generosity. Suddenly, something gigantic appeared in the depths. It looked very much like a portal. A moment later, The submarine was transported to an empty field and the ship came to rest on the ground. The guys got out of their transport. Albert did not understand what was happening. His friend explained that they were transported to a very distant and hidden place. Nicholas looked at the wall of the nearby settlement. It looked long abandoned and empty. Suddenly, the main character reported bad news. With the help of his magical vision, he saw the impending threat. The magician, with a grin on his face, advised his comrade to quickly prepare for a fierce battle. Confused, Nicholas hurried to contact his mentor and find out what was going on around him. While the old man was explaining the current situation, predatory purple birds already appeared on the horizon. The huge flock was getting closer with every second, and the heroes needed to get out of there immediately. Albert and Nicholas managed to jump on board the magic ship, which the hero had shrunk with magic, and the predators rushed after them. The alchemist asked his friend for advice, but he was recovering his strength and nothing worked on him. After some time, the guy reported disappointing news. He would only be able to find a way out of here in 10 days. The main character put his hand on his friend's shoulder. He promised to protect him from all troubles during this time. Nicholas told about a small house of a swordsman nearby, and the ship headed there. The warrior commanded, and the talented magician happily carried out all his orders. In one of the rooms of the house, there was a large golden statue, graciously welcoming its guests. The boys paid absolutely no attention to the magical artifact. Instead, they took everything that might be useful to them in the future. Meanwhile, the flock of angry birds had almost reached this hut. Albert was incredibly happy, because they managed to take everything valuable before their approach. A few minutes later, the ship with the heroes on board broke through the wild statue. The magician noticed several strong birds, so he hurried to put on his armor. Nicholas was surprised to see it. The hero soared into the air and created several bird-like warriors around him. The guy was fully prepared for a quick, bloody clash with the pack. The old man who advised Nicholas noted Albert's outstanding fighting talent. One of the summoned warriors prepared a magic bow and pulled a powerful arrow. He was ready to attack at any second. A second later, he fired a shot, and everything around was illuminated with a blue glow. Nicholas could not believe in such effectiveness of simple dolls. He tried to support his friend. Suddenly, he asked Albert if he could create a puppet that was more powerful than these. The main character decided to play a joke on his friend. He offered him to buy one of these dolls for a very high price. Nicholas hastened to moderate his ardor. He had some minor financial problems. Despite all the efforts of the magician, the birds of prey did not want to leave the strangers alone. 5 days later, all of Albert's dolls were destroyed, and he fell to his knees near the corpses of the warriors. The hero regretted the money he had wasted, and Nicholas tried to cheer up his partner. The guy drank someone else's blood from his cheek. He needed to hold out for another 5 days. Suddenly, the main character rose from his knees and, filled with resentment and indignation, headed towards his enemies. Albert put his armor back on, his gaze wild, birds flying everywhere. The feathered creatures didn't even have time to realize that the guy had just used a powerful technique. Suddenly, the whole sky was illuminated by light coming from a bunch of powerful explosions. The birds had no chance to survive. Nicholas watched the battle with excitement. His mentor had only met such a capable warrior once in his long life. The boy wanted to meet another powerful fighter, and the old man promised that this would definitely happen in the future. Nicholas turned around, his face frozen in a grimace of obvious incomprehension. His mentor, Arthur, looked closely at his student. This warrior is the one whom the young man must avenge him. Their conversation was interrupted by Albert, his sudden, piercing cry piercing the air. Nicholas immediately turned towards him. He was very concerned about the main character's condition. The magician returned to the ship, and the cloud from the explosion still remained directly above him. The hero swore rudely at one of the birds. It turned out to be much stronger than the others. The feathered creature used a sonic attack. The guy grabbed his head. It was splitting with pain. Albert did not give up. He created a large and powerful weapon and did not doubt his superiority. The crosshairs of the sight were aimed precisely at the carcass of the giant bird. A second later, a shot rang out. A huge hole appeared in the monster's body, and he was defeated. The other birds looked at the falling corpse in surprise. They realized that they had chosen the wrong enemy. The protagonist wiped the blood from his face, a maniacal smile adorning his face. Albert decided not to stop and immediately called for help from several cannons. 5 days later, Nicholas had fully recovered, and the boys were rushing to board the submarine. Later, they returned to the city and went to a local cafe. The guy asked the magician to make a copy of the swordsman's legacy for him. The hero suggested that his friend take the original, since he was not at all interested in this area. The young man looked down. He didn't know how to thank the alchemist for such generosity. Albert asked Nicholas one question, the answer to which only an experienced warrior could know. The guy immediately agreed to fulfill his friend's request, even if he didn't know the answer. The protagonist asked if there was a 13th level of skill development. His comrade did not know the answer, so, returning to his room, he asked his mentor about it. The old swordsman demanded that he be shown respect. Then perhaps he would respond. Nicholas fell to his knees. After this, the mentor stated that everything depended only on the will of heaven. He told of ancient times the world was ruled by werewolves who did not allow people to develop their skills. The masters could not come to terms with the world order, so they began to look for a way around these rules. People could reach the 36th stage of development and higher. What he heard greatly surprised Nicholas. The old man warned the student that such advanced powers could bring the wrath of heaven. The guy realized that the 12th step is the limit, so as not to anger the gods. The student walked up to the window and wondered if he had the necessary abilities. He could travel back in time to bypass the restrictions. Meanwhile, Albert lay on the hammock. Despite the calm surrounding him, he was very worried. He was tormented by thoughts of the abandoned orphans and his unlucky friend Chris. 10 days later, a giant ship returned to the city from the expedition. All the students needed to get back on board, so soon dozens of silhouettes surrounded by magical auras appeared in the sky. Already on the ship, Richard met the hero and asked how he spent his free time. Albert asked if the expedition route was always different, and his interlocutor answered positively. According to him, with such weapons they are safe absolutely anywhere in the world. The alchemist dreamed of learning how such vessels were constructed. He was interested in their operation. Suddenly, Richard's expression changed and he rudely declared that the sect of blacksmiths who created this ship was very vile. The guy suddenly put his hand on the main character's shoulder and he was quite puzzled. Suddenly, he burst into a speech in which he expressed his sincere admiration for Albert's blacksmithing talents. Richard asked the magician to lead a sect of blacksmiths in the future and build a ship much better than this one. He also said that his mentor predicts a great future for the hero in 100 years. The alchemist made a strange face. He thought completely differently. Albert needed to change the subject immediately, so he asked about the development of his invention. According to Richard, only after the expedition is completed will they be able to begin practical use of the new means of communication. The main character was very proud of himself. In the future, almost the entire population of the sect would use his devices. The guy has already come up with a plan to monetize his idea. This will solve all his financial problems. Suddenly, a piece of land appeared in the distance. The friends interrupted their conversation and turned around. With the help of his magical vision, Albert saw a small building on the surface of what he believed to be an island. The magician turned to his comrade and asked what this place was, and he called it a turtle shell. Indeed, looking closely at the water, the hero noticed a giant amphibian in it. Richard grabbed his friend by the hand and hurried to treat him with the barnacles that were growing on the animal's carcass. After some time, the main character looked at the fried delicacy with bewilderment. Unexpectedly, Claire and a girl named Linda, who had asked for help fixing the boiler, joined the meal. The brother asked his sister where his father was. She replied that his favorite pot was broken and he was not in the mood. Upon hearing of his father's misfortune, Richard immediately set about creating a new one. The guy offered to give it to Thomas to cheer him up, and his sister happily agreed. Meanwhile, Albert thoughtfully watched the beautiful girls, his gaze directed at Claire. Linda kindly thanked the hero for his help. Her boiler became much better. The alchemist, enchanted by the girl's beauty, began to flirt with her, but she was not thrilled with what was happening. Claire hastened to moderate the guy's ardor. She explained that her friend was the daughter of the combat squad's mentor. After these words, Albert nervously swallowed another acorn. He had heard a lot about this formidable man. Suddenly, Linda lashed out at Claire, feeling ashamed at the mention of her father. The hero froze in anticipation, his gaze directed at the two charming girls sitting next to him. The alchemist's daughter winked slyly, realizing that Albert had apparently fallen in love. The guy decided not to approach this girl so as not to get into trouble and suddenly felt that Chris was in danger right now. At this time, a young man, dressed in the armor given to him by the hero, ran quickly. He was being chased by several werewolves. They looked like attractive girls. Suddenly, right before Chris's eyes, a half-naked lady appeared, beckoning the guy to her. He was taken aback for a moment, but then immediately came to his senses and did not succumb to the provocation. Unfortunately, this was enough for the werewolves to surround the poor young man. One of the girls wrapped a magic thread around the warrior, trapping him. The cute enemy approached the immobilized Chris. He was very embarrassed. Unfortunately, the boy was unable to escape, so the werewolves seduced him. Meanwhile, Albert looked thoughtfully into the distance. He considered it necessary to help his friend in a difficult situation. Still, He decided to do it when he returned home and turned to Linda, Richard, and Claire. 3 days later, Nicholas came to his friend late at night and told him everything he had managed to find out. The hero really wanted to sleep, but he managed to hear about the danger of the wrath of heaven. Albert laughed it off and said that he asked out of simple interest. Nicholas breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, the magician was lying. He planned to study this issue in detail after the expedition was completed. Suddenly, the young man grabbed the alchemist. He wanted to thank him for saving him, treating him to a drink in barnacles. A month later, Albert finally returned home and was happily greeted by Kate and Kevin. The guy asked menacingly if the boy had been training in his absence, and the sister answered positively. The alchemist was very glad to see his hut again and breathed the familiar air. A little later, Chris and Eva came to visit to celebrate the hero's return. In the evening, tired from the day, Kevin collapsed on the bed and instantly fell asleep, with his sister lying next to him. Albert sat down next to him, looking lovingly at the sheltered orphans. Suddenly, he turned rudely to Chris and his wife. He realized that something was wrong with them. The guy licked his lips like a cat. His eyes changed. A werewolf possessed him. The protagonist was surprised to hear the proposal to make himself the main one on the continent. The guy didn't fall for the monster's tricks. He was angry because they were using the bodies of his friends. The beasts were no slouch and donned strong armor, preparing for battle. The magician grabbed Eva and looked into her soul. The werewolves had no chance to defeat the creator of the armor. Suddenly, Chris appeared from the side, the monster that had possessed him using an unknown spell. Albert instantly found himself in the middle of the courtyard of his house. There was no one around. Suddenly, he heard a very familiar voice behind him. He turned around in fear. A moment later, Lily jumped on the guy. The magician could not withstand the pressure and fell to the ground. The worried girl said that she had prepared a delicious dinner for her husband and something nice. The main character picked up the energetic Lily in his arms and carried her to the bedroom. The girl lay down on the bed and got ready. Suddenly, her eyes became like a cat's. The wife passionately embraced her beloved man, and animal whiskers appeared on her cheeks. Suddenly, the girl took on the appearance of Eva, and instead of Albert, a surprised Chris appeared above her. The werewolves were frightened by this unexpected development of events. Behind this absurd scene stood a hero. The guy used a special technique and pulled the souls of monsters out of his friends' bodies. Rescued. Chris rushed to his best friend. His wife burst into tears of joy. The guy was crying like a baby. The main character hurried to calm him down. The magician looked angrily at the werewolves. He promised to cause them even more suffering. After this, a snake appeared near the face of one of the animals and it took over his mind. Chris started to get nervous and asked his friend to just kill the monsters, looking suspiciously towards his wife. But it was too late. A second later, everyone in the room saw the werewolf's memory of how they seduced the guy. Eva was stunned by what she saw. Albert didn't know that everything was so serious. Chris began to justify himself in every possible way to his beloved. At this time, the hero sealed the souls of the werewolves in a ball. He gave the artifact to his friend so that he could get a reward for them, but he was not happy. A serious scandal was brewing at home. Meanwhile, something strange was happening in the werewolf lair. The animals gathered together. The supreme master of the heavenly throne sect scolded the monsters, his face flashing with disdain. The man looked into the magic crystal. He did not want the werewolves' attempts to revive their greatness to be in vain. A year later, Albert remembered the past. He had been in this world for 14 years already. The guy was standing again by his wooden model of the city, holding a new car in his hand. The hero missed his past life very much. His gaze was filled with grief. Going out into the courtyard, the alchemist discovered an uninvited guest, and goosebumps ran across his body. It turned out to be Nicholas. He turned to the guy with a request to help in the transition to the stage of the birth of the spirit. The main character was not particularly happy with him. He suffered only losses from his friend and constantly got into trouble. Nicholas put on a sweet face, and the boy turned to the best blacksmith he knew. The old swordsman ordered his student to be more persistent, but the young man did not like it. Suddenly, Albert stopped and turned around. His friend offered him a recently found ancient box as a reward. The blacksmith's face immediately changed and he agreed to fulfill the request. He needed to make 36 magic swords. The mentor sternly reprimanded Nicholas for throwing away such valuables. After the guy left, the main character noticed a strange boulder standing in the middle of the yard. It turned out to be Kate, using a camouflage technique, and the teacher grabbed the girl by her pigtails. The little student had long been learning the technique of transformation and even kept a diary. Albert was proud of her successes. Later, the hero approached Kate and asked her to come into the house. The girl brought tea and decided to ask how the hero managed to figure her out. The guy said that this comes with experience and advised the student to continue training. After this, Albert praised Kate's tea and broke into a satisfied smile. The girl said that she had found something interesting and handed the hero a package. Unrolling a piece of cloth, he saw a fragment of a willow branch that had been struck by lightning with a thunder rune imprinted on it. The alchemist lifted a piece of wood above himself and began to cast a spell diligently. He made a useful elixir from pieces of willow for Kate. She thanked the mentor for his care. Albert asked where Kevin was now. His sister replied that he had gone on a mission with Chris. Suddenly a voice was heard from behind, and the girl turned energetically towards its source. It was Chris and her brother who returned, the warrior holding a strange box in his hands. He put it on the table and removed the lid. According to him, there was valuable ore there. The main character froze in anticipation. Half an hour later, the orphans were fast asleep. Chris kindly covered them with a blanket. Albert demanded to immediately tell him where the boy found these valuable crystals. A week later, the hero was still studying the ore. It could store the consciousness embedded in it for a long time. He went out into the yard and came up with a wonderful idea. The magician would use crystals to infuse the battle dolls with a piece of his mind. The guy decided to test his new invention, so he prepared his fighting gorilla. Albert created a large white wolf with a horn on its forehead, its eyes shining with cruelty. The predator pounced on the doll, its entire mouth covered in razor-sharp fangs. The gorilla managed to put his club forward and block the enemy's blow. She pushed the wolf away. He fell to the ground without moving. The hero was very happy with his invention. At that very moment, Chris arrived, surprised by such a strange sight. The guy said that he brought everything necessary to repair the armor damaged by the werewolves. He also shared the good news that Chris had almost managed to make peace with Eva. Albert reminded that just 20 kilometers from here, there is the 100-Flower sect, inhabited by girls who rarely see men and want to seduce them to death. The alchemist strongly advised his friend not to approach that place under any circumstances. Chris didn't understand what this whole conversation was about if he wasn't going to go there anyway. The next day, the boy was given the task of going to the 100-Flower sect. A tear rolled down the warrior's face, which was very unexpected for him. The teacher ordered the boy to fulfill his request, because in that case they would be given a reward. Chris stared at the ground, remembering the protagonist's recent warnings. He threw himself at the feet of his mentor and asked to send another person, the image of an enraged Eve already appearing in his head. The man decided that he would be ashamed to send a student with such a beautiful face. He poked his finger into the guy's forehead and came up with a brilliant solution to the problem. Meanwhile, Albert and Nicholas were desperately trying to figure out how to save money when forging magic swords. The main character did not believe his friend's stories about his poverty. In fact, the guy had millions, but he constantly has to spend money on everything necessary for his mentor. Later, Nicholas went to a local pawn shop where he pawned a bag of his belongings. The old swordsman was unhappy with this state of affairs, and the student had no choice. At this time, Albert was finally able to remove the seal from the box given to him by his friend. He began to slowly lift the lid of the box, and a very bright beam of light came out from it. The magician's entire face was covered in a golden glow. He couldn't believe his eyes. Suddenly, Nicholas noticed that he had lost his jade ball, which served as a lantern. The protagonist was very upset at the sight of the useless jade ball. He angrily threw it out of his hands, realizing that he had been brazenly deceived. Later, Chris finally arrived at the 100-Flower sect, and guys and beautiful girls were having fun around him. Luckily, the mentor gave him an elixir of disfigurement. The guy promised to personally strangle himself if he cheated on Eve again. Next to the warrior sat mentor Ethan, holding a fan in his hands and deep in thought. Several female students of the sect immediately went to him and surrounded him with their attention. Opposite him sat a beautiful woman in a rather revealing outfit. She noticed that Chris's appearance had changed and blew him a kiss. The guy turned deeply red and his heart started beating wildly. Then the woman approached Ethan and tried to seduce him. If the man even looked at her, he might not return home. Chris noticed the stranger's curvaceous figure, and his nose started bleeding from excitement. A second later, a young girl sat nearby, and he began to feel even more embarrassed. The warrior was overcome with memories of what happened with the werewolves. He had to control himself. Meanwhile, Albert lay on a deck chair, admiring the sunset and reflecting on his failures. He created fire chicks, which were needed to awaken the spiritual fire, which would increase his forge rank. Suddenly, Nicholas's voice was heard, and the hero's heart almost jumped out of his chest from fear. The young man finally brought everything that was needed to make magic swords. The guy thanked the magician for helping him find resources, but he was not thrilled with Nicholas's company. At that moment, a friend whispered to Albert about a large deposit of ore that could enrich them. She was guarded by several strong monsters, but the main character already imagined himself bathing in gold. A strange phrase came out of the heated Nicholas's mouth. He considered himself and the magician to be ideally suited to each other. Albert did not want to share the ore, so he rejected his comrade's offer in every possible way. As a help, the hero offered the guy his new robot, capable of extracting minerals. The old swordsman ordered his apprentice not to stop and to shake out a few more useful things. Nicholas put on a sweet face and said that he would only feel safe in the presence of the protagonist. The magician promised to provide him with armor as well, and the friends parted ways, with Albert regretting his comrade's arrival. At this time, Chris made every effort not to succumb to the charm of the girls around him. Suddenly, one of the students called out to him. The guy was holding on very steadfastly. Her face and figure were beautiful. She wanted to hug me goodbye. Chris firmly and decisively refused the girl, his face turning red. Despite this, the student still pounced on the guy and hugged him tightly. She kissed his neck, leaving a clearly visible lip imprint. Besides, Chris accidentally touched the girl's chest with the edge of his palm. The next moment, the guy's eyes flared with anger. He couldn't imagine how he would justify himself to his wife. Meanwhile, the residence of the Supreme Master of the Heavenly Throne sect was visited by an uninvited guest. It turned out to be a woman named Amelia, who was training Lily. The man treated her to tea, and she said that she wanted to allow the student to meet her husband. Albert couldn't believe his eyes when he saw not a little girl but a tall young woman. She turned around and struck the guy with her beauty. There was a sweet smile on her face. Lily threw herself into the arms of her beloved husband. The girl missed him very much. Kevin and Kate were quite surprised to see their mentor's wife flying in on a divine bird. Drooling, the wife suggested that the main character go with her and even have children. Albert didn't want anything like that at all, so he began to deny it and look for various excuses. Later, the guy introduced Lily to orphans who were like children to him. The girl was delighted and broke into a happy smile when Kevin called her mother. Lily handed the children one bottle each, and they were delighted with what was happening. Soon, a magic bird appeared on the horizon, and the student said goodbye to the hero and the orphans. Suddenly, Albert called out to her. She stopped abruptly and turned around. The guy approached the girl and put a ring on her finger. The couple looked at each other carefully. Now they had become real husband and wife. Lily looked at the parting gift. She said that she would always miss the hero. The magician smiled and answered the same. He was finally happy. A few moments later, Albert stood alone, watching the bird disappear into the distance. Amelia couldn't understand what her student saw in this loser. Lily loudly flared up at her mentor. She considered the hero the best guy in the world. After these words, the girl happily plunged into the memories of their first meeting. Meanwhile, the protagonist told the orphans about their gifts, which were pills based on phoenix blood that help in case of critical injury. After learning that the mentor had nothing of the sort, Kate and Kevin offered to take them with him, but he politely refused. He looked thoughtfully at the sky, remembering his beloved wife. A little later, the guy went to the forge. He wanted to create a device that would control the minds of battle dolls. He suddenly stopped, feeling the presence of a stranger next to him. The hero went out into the yard to meet the stranger, but was very surprised. It turned out to be Chris. The guy showed the lipstick mark left by the disciple of the 100 Flowers sect and explained the situation. To appease his friend, he brought an incomprehensible thing bought at the fair. Chris was overjoyed when he heard that Albert would help him. The hero looked closely at the lip print. He needed to find a solution to the problem as soon as possible. The magician reported disappointing news. This trace had already merged with Chris's soul, and it could only be removed if he moved to the stage of the birth of the spirit. Suddenly, the main character took a sharp blade in his hands and smiled evilly. His comrade became very nervous. Albert swung at him, and the boy stepped aside in fear. The blow was so strong that Chris, letting out a shrill scream, flew back several meters. Suddenly, he felt excruciating pain and blood began to flow from his neck. The protagonist almost instantly shoved the pill given to him by Lily into his friend's mouth. In the mirror, Chris saw a fairly large scar in place of the lip imprint. Albert took him by the hand and calmed his friend, assuring him that he would disappear as soon as the boy moved to a new stage of development. That evening, Nicholas tried to escape to the Valley of the Large Tusked Elephants, where the valuable ore was located. He was chased by giant animals and tried his best to survive. Suddenly, the young man saw an energy field emitted by the portal ahead. Nicholas, without thinking, touched it to avoid death in this nasty place. A moment later, Kate and Kevin, who were playing in the yard, noticed a glow in the sky that looked like a shooting star. The children rushed to wake up the sleeping Albert to tell him about the unusual find. The sister offered the mentor to drink an elixir of vivacity, which she found in a nearby lake. Kevin reported that he felt the presence of dangerous monsters there. The hero became very nervous. He began to ask the children what they would do if they encountered a dangerous enemy. The children handed the teacher a scroll on which a clear plan of action was written. Albert stroked Kate's head sweetly. He was ready to trust their plan. 3 days later, all three reached the lake in their flying ship. The protagonist carefully examined the perimeter. The brother caught his sister, who jumped from the ship. Kevin explained that he discovered the place when he was trying to catch a small white fox, and there was a mysterious man standing behind him. He held this tiny animal in his hands. It looked a little scared. The man kindly gave the fox to Albert, who noticed a strange aura in it. The animal called the hero names, so he let the children take it. Kate was overjoyed. The fox was acting aggressively and almost bit the boy. The main character placed his students in a magic bubble. It was time for them to go to the portal. A moment later, all 4 of them dived to the bottom of the lake. The children were having fun. At the bottom, they came across a large closed gate. Kate took a mysterious crystal out of her pocket. There was a mysterious mechanism on the door. The girl placed all 6 crystals in the appropriate recesses. After this, the gates opened loudly, and the heroes saw a large hidden world behind them. The main character took out his new invention for controlling the minds of dolls. He planned to test it. He sent several of them to extract useful resources, while the rest were ordered to clear the area of monsters. In addition, the magician used the vessel for draining the seas to absorb water from the lake. A ship remained on the shore, and a funnel formed in the center of the reservoir. Suddenly, the children turned around and noticed a scary, unfamiliar creature. In the middle of the clearing stood a bunch of angry animals, their eyes burning with rage. Albert asked his student to name the most deadly technique he knew. The boy called her name. The hero folded his hands in a magical gesture. With this, he summoned a huge jet gun. The magician pointed his finger at the angry animals, lightning flashing in his eyes. A moment later, the sound of a shot was heard, and the place where the animals stood was enveloped in a cloud of smoke. The children were once again convinced of the undeniable fighting talent of their mentor. Kevin suggested going in search of a stronger opponent. Albert hit him in the forehead with his finger because he did not want to take an ill-considered risk. Suddenly, the hero's device reported that the dolls were unable to cope with one of the creatures that was heading straight here. The 3 of them turned around, hearing a piercing, frightening sound nearby. A giant monster, resembling a panther in appearance, appeared from the thicket of the forest. The children began to tremble, noticing the sinister gaze of this creature. Fortunately, they pulled themselves together and prepared to fight off the intruder. The main character was very happy with the bravery of his students. Despite this, he stood in front of the twins so as not to endanger them and fired several magic arrows. The boy advised the children to watch him closely in order to gain useful experience. The beast immediately rushed towards the hero, its sharp fangs inspiring fear. The arrows hit the ground, and the shockwave sent the panther flying back several meters. The animal let out a loud roar. It was not going to give up so easily. Suddenly, the monster's body changed dramatically, and giant wings grew on its back. Albert did not expect the battle to develop this way, but he still remained calm. Even more sharp arrows rushed towards the enraged beast. A few seconds later, the monster fell to the ground, a pool of blood forming near its head. The protagonist explained to his students that even an enemy who seems defeated must be finished off. The soul of the panther flew out of the lifeless carcass and was immediately sucked into the magic vessel. The magician rejoiced at his latest victory. The orphans played with the carcass of the defeated beast. Meanwhile, an unknown guy was killing monsters in the werewolf world. It turned out to be Nicholas, disguised as the young prince of the wolves. The young man had long wanted to return home, but the old swordsman insisted otherwise. He also said that they needed a lot more resources because in the future, the guy would need 10,000 swords. Nicholas immediately imagined himself surrounded by a bunch of blades. He could become the greatest warrior. But he quickly became upset when he remembered the enormous number of artifacts required. The old man promised to take the student to his hiding place in the future, the supplies of which would be enough to cover the expenses. Nicholas was very happy to receive this news from his mentor. Suddenly, a huge hand reached out from the sky and approached the guy. The palm grabbed the young man, and the swordsman had to leave him. A few moments later, Nicholas saw a certain entity in front of him. She offered the guy to become her student. 10 years passed after these events. Albert remembered the old days. During this time, Chris and Eva had a son named Jack, who grew up and became the hero's apprentice. Growing up, Kate brought her mentor some treats and asked why he was so sad. The boy was tormented by the thought that even in 100 years he would not reach the second stage of development. The girl handed him a treat on a stick and encouraged the teacher. She considered him the strongest in the world, The main character was happy about this. A little later, Albert's best friend Chris decided to visit him. When the children left, the guy's face seemed to change. A serious conversation was brewing. Suddenly, the warrior made a cute face and asked the hero to take his friend's son as an apprentice. The magician concentrated. According to his observations, no one from Chris's circle had children of the appropriate age. The guy felt ashamed, covered his face with his hands, and began his story. 7 years ago, a warrior and disciple from the Thousand Cloud sect went on a mission where they encountered a magical snake. Before dying, the monster released a poison on them that increased passion in living beings. Chris and his partner desperately resisted the effects of the poison. However, the souls of the boy and girl had intercourse, creating a child. Albert thought it would be foolish to abandon such a special student. The warrior sadly reported that the child's mother had died upon returning to her sect. The main character believed this amazing story and ordered to immediately introduce him to the boy. It turned out that he was sitting under a tree standing right next to the magician's house. The child's name was Henry. He was 6 years old, and he was distinguished by his intelligence. The boy happily agreed to become Albert's student and smiled broadly. The child was possessed by the desire to find his father and make him repent for the death of his mother. The main character and his friend exchanged nervous glances. Their secret must remain a closely guarded secret. The alchemist led Henry into the room where he had to pass the entrance test. After using a special technique, the boy fell into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, several horned wolves emerged from one of the portals. A large bear, who was their commander, appeared behind them. He looked around angrily. A huge scar adorned his forehead. With the help of his hawk, he realized that he was in the human world. Smiling, the commander considered it necessary to inform his fellow werewolves about this discovery. At this time, Nicholas sat quietly and obediently listened to the lecture. The mysterious entity turned out to be a powerful mentor. He taught the boy for a long time. After a few days, the main character finally managed to make his own sniper rifle. Suddenly, frightened orphans ran into the room. Kevin reported the approach of an army of werewolves. According to him, the animals kill all people in their path. Albert could not believe his ears. The boy looked at his students. He really didn't want to send them to war with monsters. The alchemist placed his hand on the table and ordered the orphans to begin training immediately. Before this, Kate and Kevin needed to buy the necessary ingredients and animal souls. The children had no doubts about the correctness of their mentor's decisions. War was brewing. 3 days later, the hero showed his brother and sister the Hall of Illusions, where time passed differently than in the real world. He also gave them special pills to help avoid side effects. The children will have to spend 1 month here. From time to time, Albert visited his pupils. By this time, the situation in the world had become tense, and more monsters were breaking through the portal. The rulers of many countries decided to help people and destroy the magical teleportation field forever. But one of the world's strongest swordsmen had already done so, killing 2 generals before disappearing without a trace. The werewolves retreated, but promised to remove the seal, holding back the powerful monsters if people entered the forbidden area. It was a territory surrounded by a protective sphere, where warriors were constantly on duty. After a while, Kevin demonstrated what he learned in the Hall of Illusions. The hero explained the situation in the world to the children, and suddenly he received a message. It was from Richard, who had persuaded his mentor to take Albert to the front lines. The guy wasn't particularly happy about this news. He didn't want to risk his life in the war. Richard reported that the best blacksmiths were gathering at the front line. This was the best opportunity to demonstrate their skills. The next morning, they set out on their journey, taking the orphans with them, who encouraged their teacher. Kevin called Albert over and pointed into the distance. The main character saw the restricted area and found it quite safe. Richard put his hand on the mage's shoulder and told him the bad news. The werewolves had received the coordinates they needed. According to him, this meant that monsters could enter the human world by paying a certain amount. All this is due to the fact that the monsters were the masters of this world, and therefore have every right to be here. In ancient times, werewolves wanted to unite their world and the earthly world. But, unfortunately for them, this process was hindered by people. They rebelled against the enslavers. Richard explained that the merger was almost complete, so monsters and humans could invade each other with impunity. Suddenly, right under the ship, several werewolves appeared, breaking through the barrier. They were noticed by Kate and Kevin. The children were very scared when they saw such monsters. Horrible monsters appeared from all sides, drooling from their mouths. Suddenly, they were enveloped in a yellow glow and the air smelled of gunpowder. It was a ship's cannon that fired. Albert and his students watched the crater that formed where the werewolves stood. The hero advised Kevin to train even harder to master a technique equal in power to this shot. Suddenly, a stranger called out to the magician and offered to do a small job for him. The man looked very strong and tall. He asked the guy to fix the broken armor. A moment later, the brute put his hand on his shoulder and led him into the forge. The armor was in terrible condition. Albert was not sure that he could handle repairing it. Luckily, the guy found a way out and asked the customer to bring some ingredients. The man could not believe that such an undeveloped person could help him. The main character, noticing this, demonstratively refused the order and headed for the exit. The brute hastened to stop him and promised to bring the necessary materials. A few hours later, Albert and his students completed their temporary home. Suddenly, a portal opened behind the hero. A hand reached out and grabbed him. It was the same man again. He had obtained everything he needed and was preparing to help the blacksmith. The guy took the crystal ore in his hands. The brute ensured the maintenance of the spiritual fire. The work was in full swing. The hero had time to get to know the man better. His name was Isaac. He told a little about himself and said that Richard's mentor advised him to turn to the magician. Moreover, if the job is done perfectly, he will reward the protagonist with a piece of meteorite ore. Albert was extremely happy to hear this. Such a valuable metal was very difficult to find. After a few hours, the work was completed and the armor looked like new. The blacksmith suggested equipping them with magical abilities for greater efficiency. Isaac quickly grabbed his box, which contained the treasures of the ice element. The guy rummaged through it and chose a magical artifact in the form of a dragon. The brute immediately boasted that he personally killed this huge monster. The man doused the armor with spiritual fire. A long and difficult process lay ahead. Using a brush and bone powder, Albert applied several runes. With the next movement, he took the artifact in his hands and prepared to put it into the armor. Suddenly, a ghost of a giant dragon appeared in the forge, wanting to break out. The monster's soul was so huge that all the warriors nearby could see it. After finishing the work, Isaac brought a bag with the promised ore and a reward of 200,000 spiritual stones. But he found the main character falling asleep right at his workplace. A little later, the brute went to test the armor by challenging the bear to a fight. A beast of monstrous size loomed over the man, looking aggressively at the man. Isaac prepared for a brutal battle. He planned to kill the monster or die himself. A moment later, they were locked in a bloody fight. The next day, a clash occurred between the people and the horde of monsters. A huge earthworm tried to swallow one of the warriors. A second later, an equally large hole appeared in his mouth. The fighters were covered by Kate, who was positioned on a nearby cliff using a sniper rifle. Several giant birds of prey became visible in her sight. With one precise shot, the girl pierced the head of the feathered creature. She enjoyed the fact that she could defeat the enemy at such an impressive distance. Kevin appeared on the battlefield. One of the warriors ordered the boy to immediately return to the safe zone. But the little fighter did not listen to him. He prepared for his new attack. A column of a substance resembling hot lava fell from the sky onto the heads of the monsters. The monsters' bodies were destroyed, but their souls remained intact. Kevin used another powerful technique and finished off the remaining life force of the creatures. The huge bird began to create an energy ball and aimed at the boy. Fortunately, he noticed the impending threat in time and managed to deftly avoid the attack. One of the birds managed to get close to the guy. It stood behind his back. Suddenly, there was a shot, and a bullet pierced the feathered creature's head. The boy's sister boasted of her powerful and useful weapon. Kevin was no slouch. He took one ball out of the bracelet Albert had given him and started casting a spell. The whole sky was illuminated with a bright light, and birds began to fall to the ground. Isaac and his friend watched the progress of the battle from the watchtower. The brute was very concerned about why the guest had come to the front line. The young man explained that he only wanted to find the person who forged the man's armor. Isaac threw up his hands. In his opinion, the guy had no need to look for a blacksmith. Besides, he didn't want to share such a talented master with his, apparently, rival. But upon hearing about a girl named Lucy, the thug's face changed dramatically. He immediately agreed to help the young man and bring Albert. The guy said that Lucy wanted to go on a trip, but she didn't have a companion. Isaac immediately ran to look for the main character and get tickets. Meanwhile, Albert was at his temporary home. Even here, he could smell the blood coming from the battlefield. Arriving at the site of the recent battle, he saw several corpses of monsters and a huge scarlet spot on the ground. Suddenly, the boy discovered his little students and was very surprised. The children greeted their mentor and studied the giant egg. The girl desperately wanted to know who would hatch from it. Albert thought it was too dangerous and suggested just making an omelet. Kevin agreed. Suddenly, Kate said about the hollow bone, which is a storage place for werewolves. The teacher was delighted. He remembered that werewolves had useful runes, so he ordered the orphans to thoroughly search each dead person. Suddenly, the guy received an invitation from Richard. Construction of a giant cannon would soon begin. Later, the main character reached the indicated place. His friend looked surprised. All those gathered were met by the best blacksmith master on the continent, whose name was Edgar. His assistant removed the cloth and presented the powerful weapon to the guests. Albert was not impressed at all. His techniques could easily surpass the cannon in power. The master said that he and his students would soon begin equipping the weapon with runes. Several people standing near him were surrounded by a magical aura. A moment later, it enveloped the cannon itself. Everyone around, even the main character, was impressed by Edgar's abilities. Soon the work was completed, and the mighty weapon was surrounded by a protective barrier for safety. The hero had a wonderful idea to equip himself with a bunch of different weapons. Richard reported that they would start making another cannon right now. Albert decided to take a walk. In the evening, the guy was walking along one of the streets and noticed a very strange scene. Right next to him, several beautiful girls were trying to seduce men. Suddenly, he noticed Kevin. Two ladies were trying to drag him away. The boy broke free and harshly scolded the girls. He considered them an obstacle on his path to becoming a great warrior. The angry guy walked away. The main character lurked nearby. He suddenly jumped out and gave his student a powerful flick. Albert looked angrily at Kevin. He didn't understand what such a little boy could be doing in an adult neighborhood. The boy explained that two women grabbed him and tried to drag him to an unknown place. Kevin immediately flared up and demanded that the strangers leave him alone. After that, the guy challenged them to a fight. He had 48 fights and did not lose a single one, which he was very proud of. The next day, the hero passed by the area again and noticed two excited girls. On one of the walls, the magician noticed a poster depicting his student, who was declared a crazy fighter. Albert immediately hurried to get to the hut where the orphans were now. He ordered Kevin to put on a special mask and not take it off until he left. The situation with the boy distracted the hero from searching for runes, but he found time to do it. Suddenly, he saw his old friend Dylan. He was not looking his best. When the fat man noticed the guy, he immediately burst into tears of joy. Dylan fell to the ground and burst into tears. His first venture a complete failure. The hero was not interested in business. He simply went on with his business. Suddenly, an idea came to him. The alchemist stopped and offered his friend help. The fat man promised the guy a portion of the money he earned as a reward. The main character suggested to the hapless entrepreneur to build a network of communication towers along the entire front line. After that, he raised the spiritual stone into the air. That's how much the devices needed to implement the plan would cost. The magician used magic, and a device resembling a modern smartphone appeared in front of Dylan's face. The fat man was greatly encouraged and promised to use his friend's idea. The businessman was torn apart by the thought of future wealth. For such an invention, he would reward the hero with 10 million. A moment later, Dylan curled into a circle and hurried away from Albert. The main character was confused when he saw such a strange technique of movement. Meanwhile, Nicholas continued his diligent training in the werewolf world. Suddenly, he angrily punched his leg, the guy blaming himself for starting the war between people and werewolves. The old swordsman advised the student to stop thinking about it and instead focus on training. Nicholas was very worried about his friends. The old man calmed the guy down. According to him, werewolves cannot harm the human world in any way. The teacher warned about the imminent beginning of the War of the Worlds. The young man wanted to know who would be the winner. Most of the human warriors are blessed by the heavenly will, so they have superiority. Suddenly, the swordsman pointed at Nicholas, calling him humanity's last hope in case of defeat. The guy stared at the ground. He felt he had to continue training. At this time, Chris brought the main character a bag with useful runic artifacts. Albert couldn't understand how such a loser could always be lucky. The magician opened the package and could not believe his eyes. His mouth opened wide in surprise. The bag contained a light-bearing stone that possessed the runes of the sun and moon, which allowed it to give the ability to control time. Chris offered to take the artifact from his friend, who agreed, crying joyfully. The warrior did not know what to do with such a valuable find, so he could not find a better solution than to give it to the main character. Chris traded the good weapons and armor he could get from the blacksmiths for his friend's smile. The boys shook hands, showing their loyalty to each other. The warrior looked kindly at Albert and asked him to swear that they would remain as brothers forever. After this, the friends said goodbye, and Chris flew away on his flying sword. The next moment, the hero again looked closely at the stone he had received. The guy felt uncomfortable remembering that his own students were developing much faster than he was. The magician was tormented by the thought that even after 100 years he would not achieve any success at all. Albert took a small piece of paper out of his pocket. On it was a plan for creating a time room. Then, using magic, he began to combine the light-bearing stone and the scroll. Solar and lunar runes separated from the useful artifact. After a few seconds, they surrounded the piece of paper and began to merge with it. The protagonist smiled. He planned to create a time room and train there for many years, while only a moment would pass in the real world. After that, the guy opened the door. He was filled with motivation. Soon the hero and his students returned home, and for 5 months, he tried unsuccessfully to fulfill his plan. The blacksmith decided to use spatial time grains of sand. Unfortunately, according to mathematical calculations, this requires 10 million spiritual stones. Albert swept everything off the table with his hands. He admitted that he needed to get 120 million. Moreover, sand grains are mined in space, so the hero needs serious connections. The main character came to a disappointing conclusion. He will have to sell most of his property. Albert walked out of his room into the yard and yawned widely. There, Kate and Henry learned a spell to summon magical butterflies. The girl asked her friend to show the teacher his signature move. He folded his hands in a special gesture, and a second later, figures of birds and dragons appeared in the sky. This is how the boy imagined the world of the Celestials. In his opinion, golden flying lizards and phoenixes lived there. A moment later, Henry continued to show off his skills. He crossed his fingers and disappeared. The protagonist praised the student while admitting that he was a worthless mentor. Albert decided to test the boy, so he got out a special remote control. A few seconds later, a strong wind swept through everything around, and Kate smiled contentedly. After this, a powerful downpour began to pour from the sky, and the girl took cover with a homemade umbrella. Then tall green grass began to grow quickly from the ground. The hero praised Henry for his ability to blend into his surroundings. The boy dispelled his technique, and it appeared right above Kate's head. The girl was furious at this turn of events, and the little student promised never to do it again. Suddenly, the main character created an illusion of a giant, angry tiger around himself. Henry immediately crossed his palms and formed a projection of a small white rabbit. The predator approached and looked in surprise at the cute little animal, who was trembling violently with fear. The tiger opened its mouth wide, lined with razor-sharp fangs. A moment later, Albert called for rain, and the hungry beast chased after the little rabbit. Henry was desperate to find a way to help his animal. A little later, the boy fell down exhausted, and the mentor praised him for his efforts. The student expressed a love for using illusions, as they could help him create a world in which his mother was still alive. The main character's face changed. He could not tell the truth about the boy's parents. Immediately after that, the boy hugged little Henry. Now they were his family. The student pressed himself against Albert. He was glad to feel almost paternal love. A little later, the hero brought the boy to the training hall and offered to choose several scrolls with spells. He decided to choose dark techniques. It didn't suit his cute face at all. The protagonist acknowledged that Henry was as smart as he was. The boy left the room with the scrolls. Jack hid in the shadows and looked angrily at his comrade. Chris and Eva's biological son complained to his mentor that he also wanted to learn powerful spells. A little later, the young guy began training in the Hall of Illusions. Albert transported Jack into an illusion where he was surrounded by several wild cats. Their eyes glowed red, and terrible fangs protruded from their mouths. The next moment, they simultaneously pounced on the guy. Jack pulled his sharp sword from its sheath, his gaze radiating confidence. After a couple of seconds, the young man surrounded himself with a sphere emitting lightning. With his next move, the boy created a wind sword and sent it into the sky. Right above the battlefield, the thunder and wind swords crossed, and the air was filled with tension. A moment later, Jack pierced his opponents with his blades. The protagonist praised the student because the werewolves were much higher than him in terms of strength. Chris's son was embarrassed and said the test was too easy because he was prepared for it. Then Albert made things more difficult for his protege by creating 10 monsters at the foundation stage. The magician advised the boy to step back and just watch the battle. At that very second, the mentor seemed to evaporate into thin air. Weak gusts of wind began to blow across the faces of the wild werewolves. A second later, the main character appeared on one of the stones, and lightning struck the birds of prey. The teacher drew Jack's attention to a small stream of wind that was relaxing the enemies. But the boy did not listen to him. He was already immersed in the process of meditation. Albert walked out of the hut and yawned widely. Suddenly, he was struck by thoughts of Nicholas, who he had not heard from for a long time. Meanwhile, this young man was in a bathhouse located in the territory of the werewolf world. He was surrounded by monsters that took the form of beautiful girls. The old swordsman recommended his student to continue searching for useful resources. The guy got up from the bath and said that in 50 years he would definitely return to the human world. Half a century passed. The main character grew old, and a mustache adorned his face. Little Henry was very worried because he thought that his mentor would soon die. Later, Kate, Kevin, and Jack arrived, and together they begged their teacher to drink the rejuvenating elixir. The hero refused. arguing that with age all his progress would disappear. The children looked at Albert sadly. The girl began to cry and clung to her brother. During all this time, the little students went through a long and difficult path together with their mentor. Kevin burst into tears. The protagonist reassured his charges by saying that he just wanted to make a perfect breakthrough and was not going to die. The children screamed hysterically, demanding that the teacher drink the elixir. Suddenly, a magic thread wrapped around the hero, and he was very surprised. It was a spell from a sobbing Kate. She was not going to risk the guy's life. Albert was upset. It was useless to explain to the children his true motives for growing old. The next moment, the crying girl pushed the mentor to the ground and apologized for what she would have to do. The protagonist began to desperately tell her about his true plans. Kate wasn't listening to him at all. She had already brought the bottle of elixir to the teacher's lips. The children watched intently as a single drop flew into the hero's mouth. Suddenly, a huge wooden hand grabbed the girl by the pigtail. These were the magician's battle dolls, and the student tried unsuccessfully to escape from their clutches. Albert explained to his students that if he could not break through to the next stage within a month, he would voluntarily drink the elixir. After this, the old mentor looked at the children with fatherly eyes. They looked guilty. Kevin shed a sad tear. A month later, the students agreed to break into the hall and forcibly pour a potion on the teacher if any misfortune occurred. Meanwhile, the protagonist sat quietly in the training room, waiting to make a final attempt to break through. There was only half an hour left. The guy hoped that the children wouldn't burst in at the most inopportune moment. At the same time, Nicholas came to the portal through which he entered the world of werewolves many years ago. The young man was burning with impatience, wanting to get home as soon as possible. The old swordsman offered him to stay and continue training, but he refused. Nicholas wanted to return to his parents, meet Albert and other friends again. The mentor did not contradict the guy. Instead, he created a field for teleportation to the human world. Meanwhile, the hero's students observed a strange picture. Magical clouds formed right above the hut. The magician had already begun the breakthrough process, and a magical aura was emanating from him. The guy was transported to a place that looked very much like deep space. A few minutes later, the children knelt down to greet their mentor. Albert looked young and fresh. He was finally able to make the long-awaited breakthrough. He happily reported that the children's fears were unfounded. Suddenly, the hero experienced a strange feeling. It predicted the approach of a bloody battle. The entire sky was filled with warships, warning of an imminent attack by werewolves. The protagonist ordered his students to immediately prepare for evacuation. By that time, Chris and Eva were already rushing to their aid. Albert and the children jumped into the aircraft and quickly got out of there. Meanwhile, Nicholas returned to the human world and found a strange tripod artifact. The old man said that he needed to leave immediately. Suddenly, the werewolf who trained him loomed over the guy and offered to destroy the entire continent. The monster grabbed the young man and wanted to make him the ruler of this world. Suddenly, that artifact fell from above, and the werewolf was distracted by it. This allowed Nicholas to move away from his guest. In a fit of anger, the monster destroyed the tripod. It was angry. The werewolf ordered his warriors to immediately go to the forbidden area to unite with the other monsters. A few minutes later, the entity used deadly technology, and a powerful explosion thundered in the city of people. A little later, the leader of the sect appeared in the sky. He prepared for a tough fight. His face was filled with rage. His whole body was enveloped in golden lightning. The man rushed towards the enemy, covered from behind by the ship's guns. Nicholas watched all this, very upset. The guy moved to the shores of the endless sea. He blamed the mentor for not warning him about the danger of that entity. The old man did not tell everything, because the student's hot temper would have led to his death. Suddenly, Nicholas noticed an elderly man and a girl accompanying him in front of him. The old man invited the young man to join their sect of royal swordsmen. Meanwhile, Chris and Eve were already at the portal between the countries. Everyone around was discussing the fall of the Heavenly Throne sect. Albert asked his friends to remain calm despite the current situation. He invited the husband and wife to go to the neighboring country with him and his disciples. Chris and Eva kindly thanked the protagonist for his generosity. Later, they all got to the transfer point together. Kate was scared. Unfortunately, there was a huge queue in front of them. They would have to wait a long time. Suddenly, someone put his hand right on the hero's shoulder and he became scared. It turned out to be an old friend, Isaac, who greeted the blacksmith in a friendly manner. The brute was heading in the same direction as the heroes, so he offered to join them. Albert agreed, and the crowd, seeing such a giant, immediately parted. Henry couldn't believe that his mentor was friends with such mighty warriors. Isaac hoped to help and receive a favor from the protagonist in return. A moment later, they all entered the portal that had opened. The magician stood with his mouth open in surprise. He couldn't believe his eyes. Before him appeared a huge capital, striking in its beauty. A little later, the squad reached a temporary shelter. Albert finally felt safe. The guy decided to settle into his new place and create an army of fighting dolls to protect himself from werewolves. A restless Kevin asked what they were going to do now. The children suggested that the hero found his own sect, and he was very surprised. Albert imagined this development for a moment. The boy suggested calling it the Steel Door Section. The protagonist approached Kevin and admitted that he always considered him stupid. Despite this, the guy was inspired by the idea of creating his own sect. A few days later, the hero and Isaac parted ways. He needed to forge divine items, but he couldn't yet. The brute promised to wait for his next breakthrough to ask for help again. They agreed to meet in 50 years and shook hands. A moment later, the man flew away. The main character wished him good luck on his way. The teacher told Kate that after lunch, they would go to look for a place to create a cult. Albert noticed the presence of an unusual spiritual aura in the air, which he had never encountered at home. Kevin was burning with impatience and suggested taking a walk around the city. Later, the magician noticed cloud islands floating in the sky. Unexpectedly, they met two guys on their way, offering to join one of their sects. They glared at each other, not wanting to let go of a potential participant. Suddenly, Henry stepped forward and enveloped his opponents in his enchanting spell. A moment later, the heroes moved forward, leaving behind the hugging guys. A little later, a local resident approached Albert and offered him a scroll containing all the basic information about the city. The main character took it and absorbed all the information. It turned out that his invention was widespread here. In addition, the flying islands served as communication stations. The Council of Elders of the Central Continent was in charge of everything here. Only they could allow the creation of a sect. The hero put a map on the table and advised the students to study it carefully. Suddenly, Kevin jumped up and pointed his finger at one place. On one of the islands, there was a large forest. There was a city nearby, and what's more, there were no other sects there. Kate whispered to her brother that if no organization had occupied the island, there must be a reason for it. Albert looked carefully at the map. He needed to check this place personally. Suddenly, the hero laid out a pile of money in front of the owner of the establishment. In return, he asked to explain why there was not a single sect near the neighboring city. According to him, there used to be many communities there, but soon the resources were depleted and everyone left the area. The main character listened attentively to the man. He asked if there were any minerals left there. The owner explained that there were mines deep in the forest, but they were guarded by fierce animals. And then a door opened behind him. The hero licked his fingers and looked at the new visitors. Nicholas stood at the threshold. Next to him were an old man and a girl from the Royal Swordsman sect. Fortunately, Albert managed to use a spell to change his appearance. He didn't want his old acquaintance to recognize him. Suddenly, Nicholas turned around and looked around. The girl from the sect was confused. After this, the boy turned to his mentor, mentioning the familiar face of a man who passed by. Meanwhile, the hero was already there and calmly walking down the street. 3 days later, Kevin reached a nearby village, scouting out potential locations to create a cult. Suddenly, the owner of the establishment gave a signal about the approach of lake animals. In a moment, all the visitors were running madly in all directions. A nervous man informed Kevin that the establishment was closing. Immediately after this, the boy stood alone on the threshold of the tavern. The street was empty. The guy immediately went to meet potential enemies. At this time, terrible monsters emerged from the lake, devouring everything in their path. Suddenly, there was an explosion and the creatures were covered by a cloud of fire. Kevin flew here and used the nuclear missile summoning technique. The boy didn't want to let the surviving monsters go, so he sent a flock of firebirds at them. Everything around was covered in yellow clouds formed by explosions. Kevin left only charred carcasses of the monsters. Suddenly, something purple flashed behind the little warrior. The glow came from the magical aura of the manager sent by the Council of Elders. Kevin realized that he had just destroyed a lot of fertile soil. As compensation, he gave the man a bag containing 1 million spiritual stones. The unexpected guest invited the boy to look into the Council of Elders. The manager was happy to tell the guy more about these places. A month later, Albert announced a meeting in his temporary home. A frustrated Kate and Henry reported that they could not find a suitable location for the cult. Chris and Jack had equally bad news. The main character hung his head. He too could not boast of any successes. Suddenly, everyone gathered cast an ominous glance at Kevin.